This video is the start of a new series on how to beat your opponent in a particular opening. In my coaching career, I always tell my students not to memorize the moves, but to understand the ideas and patterns. And there is no better way to do that than to analyze the games of the best players in the world. The game we're going to see was played in 1991 between Viktor Korchnoi, possibly the best chess player ever, who never became a world champion, and Garry Kasparov, universally considered one of the top three players to ever play the game, and King's Indian defense was the main weapon in his repertoire. White 3, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6. And this is King's Indian defense. When the bishop goes to g7 and occupies a diagonal a1, h8, the pawns are on d6 and g6 and the knight on f6. The beauty of this opening that you can play it against pretty much anything that white plays against you. Whether white starts with the move e4 or d4 or knight f3, your pieces in this particular structure and go from there. Goes d4, gaining the center of the board, black castles, and the most popular move in this position for white is bishop e2. What are the ideas of this opening? White occupies the center with the pawns on c4, d4, e4, and they will be attacking and expanding their pawns on the queen side of the board. Black would be attacking white pieces on the king side of the board. And that's a long strategy. In the short term, black has to challenge this strong white center, and the first move to do it is e5. So e5 is the standard move in this position. Now let's see what happens if white takes the pawn on e5. They're winning the pawn on e5, but that's not the best continuation for white, because after exchanging of the queens, black has the counter shot knight takes e4. And the problem white has, that their knight on e5 is under attack. So black are getting the pawn back, have two bishops, which are active, and this position is better for black a little bit, but most important thing is that white didn't get any advantage from the opening that white usually should have because they move first. So taking the pawn on e5 is not the best move for white, and they castle, and knight develops on c6, and white extend their pawns in the middle by the move d5, attacking the knight on c6. The knight goes to e7, which is standard maneuvering of the knight from b8 to c6 to e7 at King's Indian opening. And white goes knight e1, and that move is made in order to play f3 in the future. And the reason you need to play f3 would be known very soon. After knight d7, and the other move here is knight e8, and both moves accomplish the same idea. They free up, unblock the pawn f, and the f pawn is ready to start attacking white pawns with the move f5. So after knight d7, Korchnoi played bishop e3 and immediate f5, gaining space on the king side of the board. And white plays f3. So that's the reason the knight went to e1, because now f3 is the move to support the pawn on e4 and also create a loft for the bishop. Just in case f4 is played, the bishop can go back to f2. And exactly that happened, f4 and bishop f2. g5. Continue attacking the white pieces on the king side of the board. A4. White counterattack on the queen side of the board. And this is the whole theoretical dilemma of this opening. Who will be first? Black attack on the king side or white attack on the queen side. Black goes knight g6, gathering their pieces on the king side of the board, and white move their pieces to the queen side of the board with the move knight d3. Kasparov played knight f6 with the same ideas, and c5. That's a pawn break on the queen side of the board, and white is challenging this chain of pawns that black created on c7, d6, e5, and f4. h5. Black don't pay attention to white attack on the queen side and continue to gather their strengths on the king side of the board. h3, not to allow the move g4 so easily. Rook goes to f7, and c6, expanding even more. And again, black don't pay any attention to this and play a5, blocking the pawn on a4. Exchange of the pawns on b7 and b4, another pawn break for white on the queen side, and with the idea to create a pass pawn. So for example, if the black takes the pawn on b4, knight will take back, and here is your pass pawn on the queen side. That would be very dangerous for black. And therefore, Kasparov doesn't take the pawn on b4, but instead moves another piece from the queen side to the other side of the board by the move of bishop c8. And now bishop goes from the diagonal that was totally blocked by a pawn chain of white, goes to a diagonal that's open and potentially threatening the pawn on h3. B takes a5, and again, black don't pay any attention to the queen side of the board. They don't even take the pawn on a5. They continue to gather troops for decisive attack on the right side of the board, bishop h6. White, on the other hand, play on the other side of the board. Knight goes to a nice square on c6. g4. Pawn break finally happened, and this position looks already very dangerous for white. The clouds, the dark clouds, are gathering around the white king. Knight c6 attacking the queen, but that actually only helps Kasparov, who moves the queen to f8, and another piece is joining forces on the king's side for the attack. Exchanges of the pawns on g4, bishop g5. Eventually, that bishop would be going to a square on g3. White already start playing defensive moves. Bishop f3 to prevent potential breaks by black by the pawn on f3. So bishop f3 and queen h6, occupying an open file h. White goes rook e1. They're already thinking into the future that their king would need some escape squares from the black attack. Knight goes to h4. More and more pieces are threatening white. So knight h4, very dangerous knight on that square, so it has to be taken. Bishop takes h4, bishop takes h4. g5. That move tries to open up some squares for the bishop, but really doesn't help in this position. Queen takes g5, rook e2, potentially protecting the square on g2 from more black pieces. Knight g4, another piece is getting into attack. Excellent move, and it would be a crucial piece in order to help to create a checkmating net around the white king. Rook b1, some last attempts to create some counterplay on the left side of the board. Bishop goes to g3, and now you can already see that the queen will be going to h4 and then h2. So the checkmate is on the way. So if white moves, let's say knight b5, then they're getting checkmated after queen h4, queen h2, queen h1, checkmate. So white in this position goes queen d3, still same plan, queen h4, rook a2, and knight e3. And in this position, white resigned. And the reason they resigned because there is no escape from a checkmating net. All the squares around the king are protected by black pieces, and there is no defense from a checkmate queen h2, queen h1, unless you sacrifice your queen and take the knight on the e3. And of course, without a queen, white position will be totally lost as well. So in this particular position, just again to show you in case white plays some knight b5, queen h2 check. Actually, this is already a checkmate because the square on f1 is taken by the knight, and square f2 is taken by the bishop. So again, the only way to continue would be to sacrifice the queen, but again, it will not help long term. So a brilliant game by Garry Kasparov, showing how deadly the King's Indian could be in the hands of a master. And in my next video, I'll try to make a video about how white should play against King's Indian and how to for white against King's Indian defense, so you have a perspective from both sides of the board. Until then, thank you for watching.